The November afternoon of 2025 in Chicago brought with it a biting cold rain. The raindrops pattered against the tall windows of the Chicago Memorial Hospital, creating a dreary symphony of melancholy and despair. The hospital, with its blend of modern and ancient architecture, stood like a medical fortress amidst the windy city. The marble floors shimmered under the fluorescent lights reflecting hurried figures, doctors in pristine white coats, nurses with tired smiles, and patients with eyes full of hope and anxiety. The air inside was thick with the scent of antiseptics, blending with the sound of the rain outside, creating a sense of isolation, as if the world beyond had been pushed back by the indifferent walls of medical science. In his private office on the third floor, Dr. Alexander Grant sat behind his polished walnut desk holding a thick file of patient records. He was 45 with carefully styled salt and pepper hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and a suit beneath his lab coat resembling a nobleman in the world of medicine. Grant hailed from a prestigious medical family, with 4 generations of his ancestors being renowned figures in Chicago. His grandfather was the founder of the pediatric neurology department at this very hospital, and his father was an honorary professor at Harvard Medical School. Alexander Grant had built his reputation by treating the children of Chicago's elite kids, from billionaire families, politicians, and wealthy businessmen. He specialized in saying what rich parents wanted to hear, even when real hope had long vanished. But deep in his mind, Grant was haunted by a mistake from 3 years ago, a rushed, careless diagnosis that he had hidden to protect his reputation. Every night he woke with an eerie fear. What if someone finds out my career will be ruined? Today he was preparing for a meeting with the hospital board, where he would present his successful cases, but in his heart, a vague unease gnawed at him, as if the rain outside was tapping on his soul. Suddenly, a commotion from the main lobby pulled Grant out of his thoughts. He stood up, looked through his office window, and frowned as he saw a boy, around 10 years old, standing in the lobby, raindrops dripping from his worn-out coat onto the marble floor. The boy was Ethan Parker, wearing tattered sneakers, muddy jeans, and messy black hair beneath a soaked wool hat. Ethan had walked 12 blocks through the pouring rain, his legs numb from the cold, but it wasn't the cold that made his hands shake. It was the urgency of a promise he had made to himself. 3 days ago, through a chance conversation with a nurse he knew in the poor neighborhood, Ethan had learned about the case of Sophia Hayes, a 7-year-old girl, the daughter of the head of the surgery department, diagnosed with severe cerebral palsy and unable to walk despite 3 years of therapy. I have to help her. Ethan thought, his heart full of determination. He wasn't an ordinary child. He was the grandson of Evelyn Parker, a legendary nurse who had worked at this hospital for 30 years before retiring and passing away 6 months ago. Evelyn was not only his grandmother, but also his mentor, his second mother after his parents died in a car accident when he was 5. A brief flashback appeared in Ethan's mind as he paused in the lobby, the warm evenings with Grandma Evelyn in their little wooden house in the Chicago slums. She, with her warm brown eyes and gentle smile, would sit beside him and tell stories about the power of soul connection. My dear, medicine is not just about medicine and machines, she would say, her voice deep and emotional. Sometimes it's about listening to the heart of the child. I've healed so many cases that doctors gave up on just by observing gestures and touching special pressure points using the folk methods I learned from my great-grandmother in the South. Ethan clearly remembered the time she taught him to recognize signs of neurological disorders through a game. Look into the child's eyes, Ethan. If they respond to warmth, then hope is still alive. She had used this to heal Ethan's cousin, a boy misdiagnosed similarly, and now he was running around like any other child. After her passing, Ethan had become homeless, wandering the streets, but the knowledge she passed on had become the flame that warmed his heart. Grandma, I won't let this knowledge fade, Ethan whispered to himself, clenching his fists to hold back the rising loneliness. Doctor. Grant's shout snapped Ethan back to the present. Security, get this kid out of here before he makes a mess of everything. Grant's voice was shrill with contempt, echoing through the lobby. He pointed at Ethan as if he were a stain on his pristine white coat. Grant felt a surge of anger. He hated outsiders like this street kids who dared to enter his pure world. Inside, he muttered, "I've spent my whole life building my reputation. I can't let some filthy kid ruin it." But Ethan stood firm. He stopped, looked straight into Grant's eyes with an unsettling calm, an expression far beyond a 10-year-old's. It carried ancient wisdom, as if he had witnessed the pains of life. "Sir, I just want to help the girl in the wheelchair," Ethan said, his voice clear, not trembling, despite his heart pounding with fear. He knew he was facing a great power, but the promise to his conscience and his grandmother's legacy made him strong. "I know how to make her walk. My grandmother taught me." The words made the entire lobby fall silent. Grant sneered, a wave of offense washing over him. "Who do you think you are, a street kid trying to teach a doctor how to do his job? Security, get him out of here." He felt a rush of blood to his face, a flicker of fear about his past secret. How did this kid know about Sophia? But he pushed it away, convincing himself it was just a coincidence. At that moment, Dr. Jonathan Hayes appeared in the hallway, pushing his daughter Sophia's wheelchair. Jonathan, a middle-aged man with a rugged face, graying hair, and always worried eyes, was the head of surgery and the hospital's largest benefactor. He had spent the past 3 years trying to find a cure for Sophia, the girl born with severe cerebral palsy and legs that had never walked. Sophia sat in her wheelchair, her large eyes curiously observing everything around her. When her gaze met Ethan's, something strange happened. She smiled, a genuine radiant smile that hadn't appeared in 3 years, and reached her small hands toward him. "Sophia, no," Jonathan whispered, pulling the wheelchair back, his heart stirred by his daughter's unusual reaction. He had seen countless doctors and treatments, but he had never witnessed Sophia respond like that. In Jonathan's heart, a spark of hope flickered, mingled with the familiar pain. "My daughter, why are you reacting to this strange child?" Sophia pointed at Ethan and said her first word in 2 years. "Friend." Her voice was weak but full of warmth, causing the entire hallway to fall into a deadly silence. Grant felt a surge of anger. He had treated Sophia for 3 years, put in so much effort, but she had never reacted to him like that. "Enough!" Grant shouted, his voice shaking with both fury and an unseen fear. "Security, get this kid out right now!" Ethan knelt beside the wheelchair, his eyes meeting Sophia's. "Hello, princess? Do you want to learn to dance?" he asked gently, with love, as if speaking to his own sister. Grant felt his blood boil, but just before security could drag Ethan away, he whispered to him, "Doctor, I know exactly why Sophia has never gotten better, and I know you know it too." The whisper was like a knife to Grant's heart, freezing his blood. He looked into Ethan's eyes. Those eyes were not those of a child, but of someone who held a secret capable of destroying everything. As security escorted Ethan out, he kept his gaze steady, full of determination. Grant stood there, his mind in chaos. Who is this kid? How does he know? The rain outside seemed to intensify, tapping against the glass like a warning from fate. The November rain still poured relentlessly over Chicago, as if the sky itself sought to wash away the hidden secrets in the heart of the city. Inside the Chicago Memorial Hospital, the tension hung thick in the air like a taut wire, even though it had been 3 days since Ethan Parker, the 10-year-old homeless boy, dared to challenge Dr. Alexander Grant, the powerful head of pediatric neurology. In his private office, Grant sat motionless in a leather chair, his gaze fixed firmly on the computer screen displaying Sophia Hayes' medical file. The greenish light from the screen illuminated his face, highlighting the deep wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the marks of sleepless nights haunted by a mistake from 3 years ago. He clicked through MRI reports, test results, and treatment notes, but his mind wasn't truly focused. Ethan's words echoed in his mind like an unrelenting refrain. "I know exactly why Sophia has never gotten better, and I know you know it too." Oh? That statement felt like a dagger to Grant's pride, making him both angry and fearful. What does that kid know? he muttered, trying to reassure himself, but his hands trembled slightly as he typed. He told himself it was just the idle talk of a street child, but Ethan's confident gaze, a look beyond that of a 10-year-old, kept him from shaking the feeling of unease. Outside the hospital, Ethan sat hunched on the cold stone steps leading to the main entrance, his worn-out coat soaked through, clinging to his thin frame. He pulled his wool hat down to cover his frozen ears' eyes, peering through the glass door at the stream of people moving about the lobby. He didn't try to enter, not because he feared the security, but because he knew his time hadn't come yet. Ethan understood that truth, as his grandmother Evelyn Parker had once taught him, was like a storm. It needed time to gather strength before it could burst forth. In his coat pocket, he clutched his small, worn leather notebook where he had written down his observations of Sophia over the past 3 weeks. The scribbled pencil marks were a testament to Evelyn's legacy, the legendary nurse who had saved countless children abandoned by doctors. Ethan remembered the long nights spent with her, when the flickering oil lamp in their shabby wooden house in the South Chicago slums cast light on her face, wrinkled yet radiant with belief. "You have to observe Ethan," she had said in her warm voice. "Every child has a story, and their bodies will tell it if you know how to listen." A memory suddenly surfaced vivid, as if happening right before his eyes. It was the summer when Ethan was 8 in the South Chicago slums. His cousin Tommy had been diagnosed with irreversible nerve damage that would prevent him from walking. The doctors had given up, but Evelyn refused to. She sat for hours by Tommy's side, gently touching specific points on his legs, singing folk songs from the South, and telling stories to encourage a response. Ethan had watched, memorizing every motion of his grandmother, how she placed her fingers on pressure points, how she encouraged Tommy with her soft yet powerful voice. After 3 months, Tommy took his first steps, shaky but determined. "That's the miracle of connection, Ethan," Grandma Evelyn had said, holding him close. "Modern medicine sometimes forgets the heart." Now, sitting in the rain, Ethan felt the loneliness surge. She had passed away 6 months ago, leaving him alone in a harsh world. He survived by scavenging for food from trash cans, sleeping in cold street corners, but the fire she had passed on still burned in his heart. "Grandma, I won't disappoint you," Ethan whispered to himself, his breath forming a white cloud in the cold air. Inside the hospital, Sophia Hayes' physical therapy session took place in a sterile room filled with modern equipment. Sophia sat in her wheelchair, her large eyes scanning the surroundings with a mix of curiosity and exhaustion. She wore a light pink sweater, her blonde hair neatly tied, but her pale face reflected 3 years of dependence. Dr. Grant stood beside her, overseeing Nurse Margaret Thompson as she performed the usual exercises, stretching muscles, stimulating reflexes, but Sophia responded weakly. Jonathan Hayes, her father, stood in the corner of the room, hands tucked in the pockets of his lab coat, his gaze filled with pain. He had witnessed hundreds of such therapy sessions, each time hoping for a miracle, but always disappointed. Today, something was different. Sophia suddenly lifted her head, staring out the large therapy room window, where the rain continued to pour. Through the frosted glass, she saw Ethan's silhouette sitting on the steps, and her eyes seemed to pierce through the distance, reaching him. Sophia began to stir in her wheelchair, her small hands flailing, trying to express something. A small moan escaped her throat, almost like an attempt to speak. Grant noticed the change, but quickly pulled the window curtains, cutting off Sophia's line of sight. "It's just a phase," he said to Jonathan, his voice dry, trying to hide his confusion. "Perhaps we should adjust her medication." But inside, he felt an unsettling wave rise. Sophia had never reacted this strongly in the 3 years he had treated her. As the curtains closed, Sophia began to cry, real tears full of frustration rolling down her cheeks. Jonathan knelt beside his daughter, holding her hand, his heart aching. "What's wrong, my love?" he whispered, but Sophia just kept crying, her eyes still fixed on the now hidden window. Grant stood there, sweat trickling down his spine. He tried to maintain his composure, but in his mind, Ethan's words rang out again like a curse. "I know you know." He wondered, how could that boy know? Does he really have proof? A flashback took Grant back 3 years ago, when he was 42. ambitious and arrogant, and had taken on Sophia's case. He had rushed to diagnose her with severe cerebral palsy, based on an initial MRI report he skimmed over to impress Jonathan Hayes, who was not only the department head, but also the hospital's biggest benefactor. When Grant realized his mistake, that Sophia actually had a treatable condition called neuromuscular disconnection syndrome, it was too late. Correcting the error would mean admitting incompetence, which could lead to lawsuits and ruin his career. Grant chose to hide it, alter the report, and continue with the wrong treatment, hoping Sophia would never improve enough to expose his mistake. But now Ethan Parker, a homeless boy, seemed to hold the key to that secret. That afternoon, as Grant left the therapy room to make his rounds, he encountered a scene that made his blood boil. Ethan was standing in the parking lot talking to Nurse Margaret Thompson, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Margaret, who had worked at the hospital for over 25 years, was listening to Ethan with a curious expression. "This boy is talking about the techniques his grandmother used for special children," Margaret said excitedly as Grant approached. "It's really fascinating, Doctor." Grant's anger erupted. "Fascinating! You're talking to a street kid. You've been ordered not to engage with him," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage and fear. Ethan turned his gaze as calm as ever. "Doctor, my grandmother was Evelyn Parker. She worked here for 30 years in pediatric neurology. You probably remember her." Grant's blood froze. Evelyn Parker. That name cut through his memory like a knife. She was the legendary nurse who had achieved miraculous results with cases that doctors like him had abandoned. She had retired 15 years ago, and now this street kid claimed to be her grandson. "No way," Grant stammered, but deep down he knew it was true. Evelyn Parker wasn't just a nurse. She was a living legend, someone even he, with all his arrogance, had to respect. Ethan smiled faintly, a knowing smile. "She taught me everything about connecting with children, especially cases like Sophia's. She said sometimes doctors forget to look into the heart of the child." Grant stood there feeling the ground beneath him collapse. Ethan was not just a street kid. He was the heir to a legacy that he couldn't compete with. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, as if screaming for the secrets that were about to be revealed. Ethan turned away, stepping into the shadows, but his gaze still haunted Grant like a promise that this battle was only beginning. Thursday morning, the November rain seemed to have eased, leaving puddles scattered across the streets of Chicago, reflecting the overcast sky like shattered mirrors. Inside Chicago Memorial Hospital, the air was still heavy, as if secrets were creeping through every crack in the concrete walls. Dr. Alexander Grant walked into the parking lot, his mind a mess, his polished leather shoes stepping through puddles, creating soft splashes. He hadn't slept well for 3 nights, the whisper of Ethan Parker echoing in his head like a curse. "I know exactly why Sophia has never gotten better, and I know you know it too." Grant told himself it was just the lies of a street child, but the fear gnawed at him from within. He, a renowned doctor who had spent his life building a career on medical knowledge and connections with the elite, now felt like a criminal waiting to be exposed. "I can't let that kid ruin everything," he thought, gripping the steering wheel, his heart filled with anger and anxiety. But as he rolled into the parking lot, his eyes stopped at the steps at the main entrance. Ethan was still sitting there like a persistent ghost, his eyes fixed on Grant with a terrifying calmness. Ethan, now with his worn-out coat dryer, sat silently observing the flow of people entering and leaving the hospital. He wasn't hungry anymore. He had found a leftover loaf of bread in a nearby trash can that morning, but his true hunger was the longing for justice. In his mind, his observations about Sophia repeated endlessly how she responded to light the movements of her legs when stimulated indirectly through the window. Grandma Evelyn Parker had once taught him that truth is like a storm, Ethan. It can be hidden, but it cannot be stopped forever. He clutched his small notebook in his pocket, filled with meticulous notes from the past 2 weeks. The scribbled words weren't just observations, they were evidence gathered from nights when he snuck into the hospital. A flashback vividly returned to Ethan's mind, taking him back 2 weeks to a stormy, windy night. It was around midnight when the hospital lay in still quiet darkness, the only sound being the hum of machines and the footsteps of the night shift nurses. Ethan, small and nimble, had sneaked through the back door of the waste disposal area, an alley he'd stumbled upon while wandering the hospital. His heart pounded, the fear rising. If I get caught, I'll be kicked out forever. But the promise to his conscience and his grandmother's legacy pushed him forward. In the waste area, he rummaged through old piles of paperwork, discarded medical reports, faulty copies that staff sometimes threw away without shredding. Among the clutter, Ethan found an old file about Sophia, an MRI report from 2020, with faint handwritten notes. He sat hunched under the weak light of his old phone, the last gift from Grandma, quickly jotting down normal brain structure signs of neuromuscular disconnection syndrome, good prognosis with proper stimulation. Grandma Evelyn had taught him to recognize these signs through real-life stories, and now they matched what he had observed through the window. This is proof, Ethan thought, excitement mixed with fear. He slipped out without being noticed, but that night he couldn't sleep, holding the notebook and thinking, I have to face Dr. Grant no matter how scared I am. Back to the present, Ethan stood up as he saw Grant approaching. Dr. Grant, his face flushed with anger, stopped before the boy. You still dare to sit here, Grant growled, trying to maintain an authoritative voice while his inner turmoil raged. He felt controlled by a child, and that made him furious. Ethan looked him straight in the eye, his voice calm but heavy. Dr. Grant, I know you're hiding the misdiagnosis of Sophia. She doesn't have severe cerebral palsy like you told her father. It's neuromuscular disconnection syndrome, a condition that can be treated with specific stimulation. I've observed through the window, and I know how to help her. The words were like a bomb exploding in Grant's head. He felt cold sweat trickle down his back, memories of his mistake 3 years ago flooding back the MRI report he had deliberately misinterpreted to impress Jonathan Hayes. You don't know anything, Grant whispered, his voice trembling, but his eyes avoided Ethan's. Ethan continued, his voice unwavering. I know you're afraid to admit your mistake because it would ruin your reputation, but that girl is suffering because of your arrogance. Grandma taught me that true medicine is about the heart, not fame. Grant turned away, his mind in chaos. He hurried into the hospital, calling an urgent meeting with the entire pediatric neurology team. In the small meeting room, with a long wooden table and the glowing projector screen, Grant stood before his colleagues, trying to regain his authoritative composure. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat. Colleagues, we are facing a delicate situation. A homeless child has been disrupting our work, even attempting to interfere with patient care. He described Ethan as a delusional childhood case, his voice filled with contempt, but inside he was terrified someone would dig deeper. Nurse Margaret Thompson, sitting at the corner of the table with a guilty expression, spoke up. Dr. Grant, I checked the records. Evelyn Parker did indeed work here for 30 years, and she had an orphaned grandson recently. This boy could be her grandson. The words caused an uncomfortable silence in the room. Grant felt cold sweat on his forehead. He remembered Evelyn Parker clearly. She was the legendary nurse who had challenged doctors like him with her strange folk methods, but always achieved results. That doesn't change anything, Grant growled, trying to mask his confusion. A child cannot treat patients here. Dr. Olivia Chen, a new neurologist from Boston, frowned. She was about 35, with neatly tied black hair and sharp, passionate eyes. Olivia had heard of Evelyn Parker's reputation from former colleagues. She was a legend in pediatric care. Excuse me, Dr. Grant, but what exactly has the boy demonstrated in terms of knowledge? Olivia asked, her tone firm. Grant hesitated. He couldn't admit that Ethan had pointed out his diagnostic error without exposing himself. Groundless theories, unscientific techniques, he replied in a dry voice. But Olivia was not satisfied. A curiosity rose inside her. If this boy is really Evelyn's grandson, this could change everything. She decided to investigate for herself. That afternoon, as Ethan still sat on the steps, watching through the glass with persistent eyes, Olivia Chen walked out of the hospital and approached him. Unlike Grant, She sat down next to Ethan, treating him as an equal, her voice warm. "You must be Ethan. I'm Dr. Chen. I've heard about your grandmother." Ethan watched her carefully, his heart full of caution, but also hope. "Did you work with my grandmother?" he asked, his voice small but clear. Olivia smiled. "Not directly, but everyone knew of Evelyn's reputation. She saved many children that other doctors had given up on." Ethan felt a warmth spread in his chest. For the first time since Grandma's passing, someone was acknowledging her legacy. But he still felt fear. In his mind, he thought, "I can't fail. Grandma taught me that the truth must be spoken no matter how painful." Olivia continued, "Your grandmother taught that sometimes doctors get so caught up in textbooks that they forget to look at the actual child." Ethan nodded, his voice more mature than his age. "That's right. I want to talk about Sophia Hayes. I really want to know if you're just testing me or if you actually care." The bluntness surprised Olivia, but she answered, "I really want to know." Ethan took a deep breath, remembering his grandmother's words. "Truth is like a storm, it can't be hidden forever." He explained, "Sophia doesn't have severe cerebral palsy like the records say. It's neuromuscular disconnection syndrome treatable with specific stimulation. I recognize the signs through observation. She responds to stimuli that children with severe cerebral palsy cannot." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. If true, this meant Sophia had been receiving the wrong treatment for 3 years. "How are you so sure?" she asked. Ethan told her about his cousin and his observations through the window, his heart full of emotion. "I'm scared, but I can't give up." At that moment, Grant appeared at the door, seeing the two talking. His face turned pale with anger. "Dr. Chen, what are you doing?" he shouted. Olivia stood up, her voice firm. "Talking to a smart boy. Ethan, I think you should meet Dr. Hayes. He needs to hear your observations about Sophia." Grant felt his blood freeze. If Ethan told Jonathan, his career would be over. He was furious, but Olivia had made the suggestion, and he was caught in a difficult position. The atmosphere in Chicago Memorial Hospital that afternoon was as heavy as a storm about to hit. Even though outside the November rain had temporarily stopped, leaving behind the gray clouds hanging over the city sky. Dr. Alexander Grant walked ahead, his steps heavy as though he were dragging lead, leading the group into the physical therapy room on the second floor. He tried to maintain an appearance of calm and authority, his pristine white lab coat and gold-rimmed glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. But inside, a storm of turmoil was brewing. "I've been cornered," Grant thought, sweat beading on his forehead, even though the air conditioning was cool. He had agreed to let Ethan Parker meet Dr. Jonathan Hayes, only to avoid appearing weak in front of Dr. Olivia Chen, but now that decision seemed like a fatal mistake. If that kid revealed the truth about Sophia's misdiagnosis, his 15-year career would vanish in an instant. Grant glanced at Ethan walking beside him, the 10-year-old, with an unsettling calmness in his eyes, and he felt a creeping fear, not of a child, but of the truth that this boy represented. Ethan walked steadily, his hand tightly gripping the straps of his old backpack containing his precious notebook. His heart raced, but it wasn't fear. It was a mixture of excitement and responsibility. "This is the moment," Grandma Ethan whispered in his heart, remembering his grandmother, Evelyn Parker. He could feel her legacy running through his veins. The folk knowledge, the lessons on connecting with patients' souls. But deep down, Ethan also worried, if I'm wrong, Sophia will never trust anyone again. And I'll be alone again. He glanced at Dr. Chen, who had an encouraging look in her eyes, and felt a small warmth. She believed in him, and that was enough to keep him going. Dr. Olivia Chen followed behind her heart, full of curiosity and hope. As a new doctor, she wasn't bound by the hospital's rigid rules, and Ethan's story had sparked a belief in humanistic medicine. If the boy is right, we could change everything she thought, but also worried about Grant's reaction. He was shaking, though, trying to conceal it, a sign of insecurity she had seen in colleagues hiding their mistakes. When they entered the therapy room, the air grew even more suffocating. The large room had a gleaming wooden floor, with modern equipment such as muscle stimulators, parallel bars, and large mirrors lining the walls. The smell of antiseptics mixed with the sweat from previous sessions creating a tense atmosphere. Sophia Hayes sat in the center of the room on her wheelchair, her large eyes full of curiosity watching the group. The 7-year-old girl wore a light pink sweater, her blonde hair tied in a ponytail, looking fragile like a flower in a storm. Beside her was Dr. Jonathan Hayes, her father, with a weathered face, his eyes red from sleepless nights, worrying about his daughter. He held Sophia's hand, his heart full of hope and doubt. Another new method. How many times have I hoped and been disappointed? But when Sophia's gaze met Ethan's, she smiled, a radiant, warm smile, and reached out her hand toward him. Jonathan was shocked, his heart racing. My daughter? Why is she reacting like this to a stranger? Grant stopped at the door, his voice trying to maintain cold indifference. All right, kid, prove it. But if you're wrong, I'll make sure you never set foot in here again, he thought to himself. As long as he fails, I'll use my power to kick him out forever. Ethan knelt down to Sophia's level, his gaze gentle. Hello, princess. I'll help you stand up. Okay? Sophia nodded faintly, her voice weak. Friend? The word echoed again, causing Jonathan's eyes to well with tears. Ethan took his notebook from his backpack, its worn leather cover, but inside were pages filled with meticulous handwriting. He opened it, his voice clear. Dr. Hayes, I've been observing Sophia from the public hallway for 3 weeks. Here are my notes. He began reading, his voice steady, yet full of emotion, as though telling a sacred story. November 1st. Sophia responded to light touch on her right foot. The big toe moved intentionally, not as a reflex. I saw this through the window when the nurse touched her foot. Jonathan listened, his heart full of doubt, but also a flicker of hope. Ethan continued. November 5th. 5th. Sophia showed conscious control of her facial muscles when encouraged. She smiled clearly when she heard laughter in the hallway. November 10th. Attempted to pronounce specific words when stimulated. She said friend when she saw me, and I believe that was a response to emotional connection. Each note struck Grant like a dagger. He stood there pale, recalling the reports he had concealed. How does this kid know the details? Grant thought, fear transforming into anger. Olivia Chen examined the notebook, her eyes lighting up. These observations are incredibly accurate, Ethan. They indicate that motor function is still intact. This doesn't align with a diagnosis of severe cerebral palsy. Jonathan took the notebook, his hands trembling. You observed my daughter without permission. Ethan nodded, his voice sincere from the public hallway. And what I saw is clear evidence that the diagnosis has been wrong for the past 3 years. Grant interrupted, his voice shrill. Absurd. A 10-year-old kid dares to question an official medical diagnosis. But inside memories of 2020 flooded back like a nightmare. A flashback vividly played in Grant's mind, taking him back to 3 years ago to a late evening in his private office. He sat before his computer, hurriedly reviewing Sophia's MRI report. The brain structure almost normal with signs of neuromuscular disconnection syndrome, a treatable condition with specialized stimulation. But at the time, Grant had been eager to impress Jonathan Hayes, someone who could help him advance. He misinterpreted the report marking severe cerebral palsy to show advanced knowledge, and when he realized the mistake, it was too late. He concealed the original report, altered the files, and continued with the wrong treatment, hoping Sophia would never progress enough to expose his error. I couldn't admit it. Grant thought then, filled with arrogance and fear. Now the flashback ended, and Grant returned to the present, sweat pouring down his face. Ethan didn't stop. He turned to Sophia, his voice gentle. Princess, are you ready to try? With his help. Ethan began a series of simple exercises Grandma Evelyn had taught him. lightly touching pressure points on her legs and back, accompanied by words of encouragement. "You're strong, Sophia. Think about running in the park." Everyone in the room held their breath. Sophia, her eyes lighting up, began to respond. Her toes curled, her knees slightly bent, and then, to everyone's shock, she stood for a few seconds leaning on Ethan's hands. It wasn't a steady step, but a purposeful movement full of awareness. Jonathan knelt down, tears streaming. "My daughter." She did it. He hugged Sophia tightly, his heart overwhelmed. 3 years of suffering, 3 years of broken hopes now melting in this moment. Grant stepped back, his face ashen. That's just an involuntary spasm. Sophia has severe cerebral palsy. This response can't be. But his voice trembled, full of desperation. Ethan turned to him, his gaze firm. "Dr. Grant, do you want me to tell Dr. Hayes about the MRI report from 2020 being misinterpreted, or about the neurological tests you concealed because they contradicted the original diagnosis?" The room went dead silent. Jonathan turned sharply. "What are you saying?" Grant stammered. "Michael?" "No." "Jonathan, don't listen to this kid. He's making it up." "But..." Ethan continued, his voice full of emotion. "Grandma kept a copy of the important test results. She was working on the files when Sophia's results came in. I've seen and written it down. MRI report, March 15th, 2020. Basic brain structure, normal signs, consistent with mild to moderate neuromuscular disconnection syndrome. Good prognosis with appropriate stimulation." Jonathan snatched the notebook from Ethan's hands, his eyes scanning the words. "Grant, is this true?" Grant collapsed, his voice weak. "Jonathan, there was uncertainty in the diagnosis. I was just being cautious." Jonathan exploded, his voice full of rage. "Cautious? You told me my daughter would never walk, that I had to accept she'd be dependent forever. You stole 3 years of my daughter's development for what? Arrogance, fear of admitting a mistake." He hugged Sophia and cried, his heart breaking. 3 years? 3 years. My daughter could have been running, but you hid it. "Olivia." Chen looked at the notebook, her voice filled with emotion. "Ethan, these notes are astonishingly accurate. They prove that motor function is still intact." Ethan turned back to Sophia, helping her stand for a few more seconds. Jonathan, with tears in his eyes. 3 years. Grant, 3 years of my daughter's life could have been different. Grant tried one last time, his voice full of desperation. "Please, let me explain." But Jonathan cut him off, his voice cold. "Explain. You've lied to me. You've lied to Sophia. You stole our hope for your own pride." Ethan closed the notebook, his voice calm, but full of a lesson. Dr. Grant, Grandma always said that true knowledge doesn't come from degrees on the wall, but from a genuine love for the patient. You forgot that. Grant tried to threaten Ethan, his voice trembling. You'll regret this, kid." But Ethan responded, his gaze full of pity. "I don't regret it, Dr. Grant. I only pity you. You could save more children if you had a heart like my grandmother's." Jonathan turned to Grant. "Grant, you're fired, and the medical board will know the whole truth." Grant staggered out of the room, his career shattered not by a rival doctor, but by a 10-year-old boy who valued truth more than fame. In the room, Jonathan hugged Sophia and cried. Ethan comforting her. Dr. Hayes, with the right treatment, Sophia can live normally. "I'll help if you allow me." Olivia nodded, her heart full of admiration. In that moment, the truth exploded like a storm, changing everything. 6 months had passed since that fateful afternoon in the therapy room at Chicago Memorial Hospital, where a 10-year-old homeless boy had shaken the entire medical system with truth and courage. The November rain had given way to the first rays of spring sunshine, illuminating the glass doors of the hospital as if reflecting a new beginning. Inside, the air was no longer suffocating with the smell of disinfectant and the tension of hidden secrets. Instead, A sense of hope spread like the first flowers blooming after a harsh winter. The hospital had changed, not only in its operations, but also in its spirit, thanks to a boy named Ethan Parker and the legacy of his grandmother, Evelyn Parker. Ethan, no longer a street child, walked through the hospital halls with a confident yet humble demeanor. He wore a light blue shirt gifted by Dr. Jonathan Hayes, new shoes, replacing the tattered sneakers from before, but his eyes still held a wisdom beyond his years. After the decisive confrontation with Dr. Alexander Grant, Jonathan had adopted Ethan, not just out of gratitude, but because he recognized in Ethan a rare heart, the kind of heart he hoped his daughter Sophia would be inspired by. Ethan now lived in the cozy home of the Hayes family in the suburbs of Chicago, with his own room full of medical books and a small desk for writing. But he hadn't forgotten the days of living on the streets, the cold nights under doorways, and the promise to Grandma, "Evelyn, I will bring your knowledge to the children who need it." A profound change was taking place within Ethan. He still remembered the trembling feeling when he stood before Grant, when the world seemed to be against him. "I was scared," Ethan thought, looking out the window of his room, one early morning sunlight filtering through the trees. But Grandma taught me that fear is not a reason to stop. It's a reason to keep going. He held the old notebook, now carefully kept in a small wooden box like a treasure. The notes on Sophia weren't just evidence of Grant's mistake. They were the flame that had lit his journey. Ethan knew he wasn't just helping Sophia, but fulfilling a greater mission, bringing Grandma Evelyn's legacy back to the hospital where she had dedicated her life. At Chicago Memorial, a new center had been established, the Evelyn Parker Center for Pediatric Neurological Rehabilitation, a modern space with colorful rooms, wall paintings, and advanced therapeutic equipment. Ethan, at just 10 years old, was recognized as the youngest advisor in the hospital's history, working alongside Dr. Olivia Chen to develop new treatment methods. The center didn't just use modern medicine, but also incorporated the folk techniques Evelyn had taught Ethan: acupressure, psychological storytelling, and emotional connection with patients. "We don't just treat the body," Olivia would often tell the team, her eyes bright as she watched Ethan lead exercises. "We treat the heart as well." Ethan, though humble, felt proud each time he saw the hopeful gazes of parents who had once been told their children were beyond help. Sophia Hayes, the girl once confined to a wheelchair, was now a living testament to the miracles of the center. At 8 years old, she took her first steps just 3 months after the confrontation with Grant. Now, Sophia not only walked, but ran, even danced in the hospital courtyard, her small legs bouncing freely like a bird set free. One morning, she ran into Ethan's office, her blonde hair flying, her voice clear. "Ethan, I can dance a new song." Ethan smiled and knelt down to her level. "Princess, you're the brightest star." But in his heart, a deep sense of gratitude swelled Sophia. "You're not just someone I helped, you're the reason I never gave up." A flashback took Ethan back to a few months ago when he and Sophia first practiced walking in the hospital yard. Under the warm yellow light, Sophia held Ethan's hand tightly, her legs trembling as she tried to stand. "I'm scared, Ethan," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. Ethan, remembering Grandma Evelyn's words, responded gently. "It's okay to be scared, Princess, but you're stronger than that fear. Think about running through a field of flowers." He sang a folk song Grandma Evelyn used to sing, his voice deep and warm, and Sophia, as if hypnotized, took one step, then another. Jonathan stood from a distance, tears streaming. "My daughter, you're walking." In that moment, Ethan felt Grandma Evelyn's presence smiling somewhere. "I did it." "Grandma," he thought, his heart full of emotion. Back in the present, the Evelyn Parker Center had become a beacon of hope, drawing families from all over. One case particularly caught Ethan's attention. Lucas, a 6-year-old boy from Ohio, misdiagnosed with severe cerebral palsy, much like Sophia. Lucas came to the hospital with empty eyes, unable to speak, but Ethan recognized the familiar signs: a light reaction when his foot was touched, a spark in his eyes when he heard music. He sat beside Lucas, repeating the exercises he had used with Sophia, acupressure, telling stories about adventures in the fields. "You'll be a knight, Lucas," Ethan said, his voice full of encouragement. "A knight always stands up no matter how many times they fall." After 2 weeks, Lucas began to move his fingers consciously, and his mother, a woman exhausted from years of searching for hope, hugged Ethan and cried, "You've given my son a new chance." Ethan, though moved, only smiled. "It's not me, ma'am. It's my grandmother's legacy." Meanwhile, Dr. Jonathan Hayes had become both a father and a different kind of doctor. He had lived in pain and guilt, thinking he had failed Sophia, but now watching his daughter run, he found a new purpose. He used his influence to ensure the center received full funding, even advocating for Ethan's program to be recognized nationwide. "I owe this boy so much," Jonathan thought, full of gratitude, but also a tinge of regret for the years Sophia had been trapped in a misdiagnosis. He often stood in the hallway watching Ethan and Sophia playing, telling himself, "This boy didn't just save my daughter, he saved me." Dr. Alexander Grant, on the other hand, had fallen into the abyss. After being fired for medical negligence, he lost his medical license after an investigation uncovered more suspicious cases. Now, he worked as a medical device salesman, a job full of irony for someone who once considered himself invincible. One evening, sitting in his small apartment in the suburbs, Grant looked into the mirror, seeing a worn-out man, his salt and pepper hair now streaked with more gray. He remembered Ethan's gaze full of pity rather than anger, and his heart ached. "I was wrong. But why couldn't I admit it sooner?" Grant tried to rebuild his life, but a reputation shattered by arrogance and prejudice wasn't easy to repair. Every time he passed by Chicago Memorial, he lowered his head, avoiding the building where he had once been a king. One afternoon in the center's meeting room, Olivia Chen walked in with an old file, her eyes bright with excitement. "Ethan, I found this in the hospital archives," she said, handing over a brown leather journal, worn but carefully preserved. "This is your grandmother's. She recorded the techniques she developed over 30 years, over 200 cases of children she secretly helped." Ethan took the journal, his hands trembling. He opened it to see Grandma Evelyn's handwritten words, each page a story about a child abandoned by conventional medicine. She said that true knowledge is passed from heart to heart, not from books. Ethan whispered, his voice choking. Olivia continued. "These techniques were never officially recorded because she knew the traditional medical community wouldn't accept them. But we can use them to help thousands more children." Jonathan walked in and overheard. He looked at Ethan, his voice full of emotion. "Boy, your grandmother didn't just save Sophia. She left a legacy that will change the future of countless children." Ethan nodded, his eyes bright. "I just want her to be proud." Sophia ran in and hugged Ethan. "Ethan, thank you for helping me walk." He hugged his adopted sister, whispering, "Thank you, Princess, for showing me what real miracles are." In that moment, the entire room fell silent, as if Grandma Evelyn's spirit was smiling from somewhere. The Evelyn Parker Center had become more than a place of treatment. It was a symbol of hope and compassion. Ethan, though only 10 years old, had become a guiding light, proving that true knowledge didn't need a degree, just a heart that would never give up. But he knew this journey had only just begun. Grandma Evelyn's journal lying on his desk was a reminder that many children out there were still waiting for their miracle. 3 years had passed since Ethan Parker first stepped into Chicago Memorial Hospital, and the atmosphere of the Windy City had changed. The spring of 2028 brought gentle winds carrying the fragrance of flowers from the city's parks, as if nature itself wanted to join in the transformation of humanity. Chicago Memorial, once a cold medical fortress with concrete walls and the scent of disinfectant, now shone brighter than ever. The main building had been repainted with colorful murals painted by children, images of the sun rainbows and small feet running freely. The Evelyn Parker Center for Pediatric Neurological Rehabilitation located on the east wing of the hospital, had become a beacon of hope, attracting families from all across the United States and beyond. The sign at the entrance of the center bore a phrase chosen by Ethan himself here: "We believe that every miracle begins when someone refuses to give up on a child." This phrase was not only a declaration, but a promise, etched deep into the souls of those who passed through its doors. Ethan Parker, now 13 years old, was no longer the homeless child in a soaked coat. He wore a simple blue t-shirt, his black hair neatly cut, but his eyes still held the wisdom and determination of 3 years ago. Ethan was now a student in a special medical program for gifted students at the University of Chicago, where he studied early with the sponsorship of Dr. Jonathan Hayes. But his heart still belonged to the center, where he worked every day after school, guiding therapy exercises and speaking with children whom other doctors had given up on. In his small office, Ethan kept his grandmother Evelyn Parker's journal on his desk, a worn leather notebook containing over 200 cases of children she had secretly helped. Every time he opened the journal, Ethan felt as though she were beside him, whispering, "You're doing well, Ethan. Keep spreading love to those children." But deep inside, Ethan still carried the loneliness of those street days. "I've found a family, a purpose," he thought, looking out the window where sunlight filtered through the trees. "But I'll never forget those days of hunger and cold. They remind me to fight for those who have been left behind." Sophia Hayes, now 11 years old, had become a symbol of the miracles at the center. The girl, once confined to a wheelchair, now ran freely through the halls, her blonde hair flying like sunshine. Sophia didn't just walk. She danced, played ball, and even joined the school dance team. But what made Ethan the proudest was Sophia's dream to become a pediatrician and help children who were once called hopeless like her. One afternoon, Sophia ran into Ethan's office wearing a green dress, her eyes shining brightly. "Ethan, I got an A in science today. I want to learn about the brain, just like you." Ethan smiled, ruffling her hair. "Princess, you'll be the best doctor. But remember, always listen to the heart of the patient, just like Grandma Evelyn taught me." Sophia nodded, hugging Ethan tightly, and in that moment, he felt a pure happiness. Not because of success, but because he had given Sophia the future she deserved. A flashback appeared in Ethan's mind, taking him back 6 months when the center officially expanded. A ceremony was held with hundreds of attendees, parents, doctors, and children who had been healed. Ethan, then 12, stood on stage, his voice trembling as he spoke. "My grandmother Evelyn Parker always said that true knowledge doesn't come from degrees, but from love. I just want to continue her work, so no child is left behind." As he spoke, Sophia ran onto the stage, performing a short dance she had practiced every week. The crowd applauded loudly, and Jonathan Hayes, sitting in the front row, couldn't hold back his tears. "This boy didn't just save my daughter," Jonathan thought, his heart full of gratitude. "He's shown me what medicine truly is." The flashback ended, and Ethan returned to the present, smiling as he saw Sophia drawing a rainbow on the center's wall. "You're my first miracle," he thought, his heart warm. Dr. Jonathan Hayes had become a different man. Once living in pain and guilt, thinking he couldn't help Sophia, he had found new purpose through Ethan. He used his influence to secure federal funding for the center, and Ethan's program, combining modern medicine with Evelyn's folk methods, had gained nationwide recognition. One morning, Jonathan stood in the hallway watching Sophia play with the other children. His heart still mixed with regret. 3 years. 3 years, I let her suffer because I trusted Grant. But when he saw Ethan guiding a new child, he reassured himself, "This boy has given me the chance to make things right." Jonathan walked into Ethan's office, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, you've done what the whole medical system couldn't." "Thank you." Ethan, embarrassed, responded, "I'm just doing what Grandma taught me, Doctor." Dr. Olivia Chen, now the director of the Evelyn Parker Center, had become Ethan's close companion. She was not only a doctor, but also a friend who always believed in his potential. One afternoon, Olivia walked into the office with a new file, her eyes bright. "Ethan, we've just received 5 new cases. children who were told by other doctors they would never walk. Their parents came all the way from California after hearing about our work. Ethan took the file, his heart filled with determination. "We'll help them all, Dr. Chen." Olivia smiled, but then her voice grew serious. "Ethan, do you know what your grandmother left in her journal? It's not just techniques, but a philosophy." She recorded over 200 cases of children she secretly helped because she knew the medical community wouldn't accept her methods, but we're proving she was right. Ethan opened Grandma Evelyn's journal, flipping to a page dated 1995. Children are not case files. They are stories, and every story holds hope if we know how to listen. He read aloud, his voice choked. "She always said that true knowledge is passed from heart to heart." Olivia nodded. "You are the living proof of what she said, Ethan." Just then Sophia ran in, grabbing Ethan's hand. "Ethan, come dance with me. I want to teach you my new dance." Ethan laughed, setting the journal down and running after Sophia into the hospital yard. Under the spring sunlight, the two danced, their laughter echoing like a song of hope. Jonathan and Olivia stood from afar, their hearts full of emotion. "This boy has taught us that medicine is not just science," Olivia thought. "It is the art of love." Meanwhile, Alexander Grant lived a completely different life. After losing his medical license, he worked as a medical equipment salesman, traveling to small hospitals with a suitcase full of machines. One evening, sitting in his dim apartment, Grant looked at an old photo of himself at Chicago Memorial, where he had once been a star. "I had it all," he thought, his heart full of bitterness. "But I let arrogance obscure the truth." He remembered Ethan's gaze, not angry but full of pity, and realized that his career had shattered not because of the boy, but because he had refused to face his own mistakes. Grant tried to rebuild his life, but every time he passed Chicago Memorial, he lowered his head, unable to look at the building that now bore Ethan's mark. The Evelyn Parker Center had now become the nation's leading center for pediatric neurological rehabilitation. Hundreds of children had been helped, from those misdiagnosed like Sophia to cases once thought hopeless. Ethan, though busy with his studies, never stopped working at the center. He spent time mentoring nurses, sharing Evelyn's techniques, and most importantly, listening to each child. One afternoon, he met a little girl named Mia, 5 years old, with bright eyes but motionless legs. "Mia, you'll be an astronaut flying to the moon," Ethan said, his voice full of encouragement, and began the stimulation exercises Grandma Evelyn had taught him. Mia smiled the first time in months, and Ethan knew another miracle had begun. As the evening sun set, Ethan stood at the entrance of the center, looking at the words on the sign. "Grandma." "I've done it," he whispered, feeling as if Grandma Evelyn was smiling from somewhere above. Sophia ran up to him, grabbing his hand. "Ethan, thank you for giving me my legs. I want to help children like you." Ethan hugged her, whispering, "Thank you, Princess, for teaching me that the greatest miracle comes from the children the world abandons too soon." Those words echoed through the space like an eternal promise to Evelyn's legacy, a legacy that not only saved lives, but also ignited hope in thousands of hearts.